But I do want to pivot this before we end. And I want to, before we close out, I do want to go back on the defense. We talk about you guys. I do know you guys mentioned the use of Xavier Tillman, or the lack of use of Xavier Tillman. And this is somebody who I get is undersized, has a pretty solid wingspan. But we talk about we talk about the Celtics getting destroyed on a nightly basis in the paint. A lot of what has to do in the paint, not only defense, but the physicality. And I feel like Xavier Tillman has that physicality that we're just not seeing. I also want to bring up another name where I know that our kind of weak point right now is the big man rotation. But Seamus, this is a guy that you've mentioned specifically these past few post-game shows, and we haven't seen him pretty much at all. This is a guy who we saw in Vegas look like the Summer League MVP for 2 games. All of a sudden, comes around preseason, he doesn't play a game. Then we're thinking, okay, well, maybe Lonnie Walker's going to make the team over him. Nope. Cut Lonnie Walker, kept him. He's the 8th highest player on the team. It's Jaden Springer. On a team that has a really hard time defending the perimeter, a really hard time at playing defense, why haven't we seen these 2 players at least at all? Maybe the last 2 minutes of a game if it's a blowout.
There's something behind the scenes that we don't see that Joe Mazzulla isn't exactly thrilled about with Jaden Springer or Jordan Walsh, for that matter. You can say that for all the guys on the end of the bench. Yeah. There are ultimately only a few spots in the rotation actually give out behind our top 6, if you really think about it. And one of those spots is definitely going to be Hauser, and you're definitely going to give another one of those spots to another big man, whoever's slotting in and out of the rotation. So after all those guys, there are a limited number of slots that you could actually go and put somebody in, I will say about that. That being said, the fact we see Jaden Springer, none at all, it's a little, I just don't know why we made the Banton trade last year to get one developing young guy on the roster again when Banton, I'm not saying Banton's the best player in the world at all, but he's at least producing something for the Blazers. Would Springer even be playing for the Blazers right now? I have no idea. Now, we can say here too that offensively, Jaden Springer has nothing really in his bag, but you do see the rest of the rotation as well. Everybody else does. You can mask that a little bit on the offensive end. Can you give him some wide open corner threes like you do Jrue Holiday? Can you stick him on the wing? Can you stick him in spots where he's going to succeed on offense and he's going to be a guard dog defensively? That's what we kind of expected out of Jaden Springer when he was traded to the Celtics from the Philadelphia 76ers. I don't know if you guys remember too, when that transaction went down, we thought we fleeced the Sixers, and the Sixers fans thought so as well, because they were sitting there going, how did we give away Jaden Springer to the Boston Celtics for essentially nothing? For nothing.
Yeah.
Because Ben went to the Blazers, and they pretty much got a second-round pick out of him. Yeah. How did they get rid of him for nothing? And yet we've gotten nothing out of Jaden Springer. He's caused us to, unfortunately, cut Lonnie Walker because of the amount of money he's making, and he's not playing whatsoever now. I don't know what the future is here for Jaden Springer. Maybe there are more optimistic views of Jaden Springer. He's only 22, 23 years old, and people believe, if he's going to develop a little further, he could be somebody who slots into the rotation later on down the line. But that's still to be foreseen. It really is. We're not seeing him at all, and that's more of just a theoretical, throw it out into the universe. How many other players have we actually talked about that with where, Trayvon Waters, maybe... No, it didn't happen. It never happened. Kadeem Allen, Jabari Bird, that was a whole different situation. I won't even include him.
He started playing good, and then the dude got arrested.
I was going to say, completely different situation there. But all these other guys were thinking, maybe. Never happens. Jaden Springer, he's starting to fall into the conversation of, can this guy... No, if we're not seeing him out on the court producing for the team at all, in all likelihood, I don't see it happening in the future. But again, optimistic views exist for that out there regardless.
It's weird with kind of the way Jaden Springer's been handled, in my opinion, because it's like a head scratcher as I'm scratching my head. I mean, it comes in Summer League. I think he only played 1 or 2 games, and he dominated those games. So they ended up resting him in the remainder final 3 or 4 games of the Summer League. So it's like, okay, Jaden Springer, maybe he's too good for Summer League. And then comes into the preseason, and you figure with all the rest that he got how well he played summer league, you're like, all right, well, let's see what Jaden Springer's got. Jaden Springer barely played. I mean, barely played in the summer league or the preseason. He barely played. Usually, you get racks of minutes in the preseason. Jordan Walsh, for example, not really existent so far here in the regular season, but I think we can all agree preseason he looked phenomenal. And then so far this regular season, we haven't seen any Jaden Springer. So it was a little interesting to see. I mean, they were playing Lonnie Walker in those final 2 preseason games like they were going to keep him and dish out Springer and trade Springer. And you mentioned that before the deadline was to cut Lonnie Walker, Seamus. Seemed like the Celtics were looking at all 29 other teams trying to figure out a deal that they can make.
And that report technically did come out, by the way, but they rephrased it, and they were gauging the interest on Lonnie Walker. No, folks, that report was being nice and dicing words. What they were doing was frantically searching, and what this is Brad Stevens in the front office. What Brad Stevens in the front office was doing, they were frantically searching to the rest of the league, all 29 other teams, like you said, Justin, to try and find a trade partner because they knew 8th highest paid player on the Celtics, Mr. Jaden Springer, he's not even in the rotation, versus we're going to have to cut a guy, Lonnie Walker, who we actually want to use from time to time because if we all remember him in Brooklyn last year, actually had a quality season in Brooklyn. It wasn't, a theoretical developing young player. No, Lonnie Walker is an NBA veteran. Fortunately, doesn't have a spot because of really the new CBA and two-way contracts and all this good jazz. He really could be on an NBA roster right now. And I believe later in the season, we likely will see him on a roster. And if he goes to the Knicks, oh my goodness, it's going to be because the Knicks are going to need him. They need him. They need a player like Lonnie Walker. And if we just give them Lonnie Walker and they face us in a playoff series, disaster. It is a complete disaster. It shouldn't make up the whole difference, but it gives them a little bit of extra. It gives another team a little bit extra off their bench while we could have had that guy. Yet instead, we kind of fumbled the bag here with Jaden Springer. Can't find a trade partner for him, nor we weren't gauging his interest at all. Jaden Springer, yes, we were just gauging his interest, his value on the trade. He had no value. We were trying to find somebody to absorb his salary, and no team wanted to out there. And yet now he's 8th highest paid player. Made us cut Lonnie Walker. He's not in the rotation, and that situation just drives me bonkers because on one hand we mismanaged it in a sense. But on another hand, the team didn't want to pay for an extra role player, which I understand it. $11 million for one extra role player who may or may not tip the scales for the Celtics. I kind of understand it in a sense. Big chunk of cash to be handing out, especially the Celtics ownership right now is trying to sell the team, so they're not exactly trying to lose money on the Celtics. But after you win a championship, go all in. Just go all in. My goodness, that's kind of it's bothersome in a sense that we didn't go all in that sense. And what's really more bothersome too is if you saw this situation arising in the summer, the Celtics, I don't know how long Brad Stevens was on the phone for, but if it was the last week or 2 weeks, it had to have been the last month or plus that because we needed Lonnie Walker over a guy like Jaden Springer. Right now, we would be talking about Lonnie Walker in the rotation instead of Jaden Springer. Where is he? And for a team competing for a title, I don't want to say that's going to be the difference at all, but sometimes it does become the marginal differences between title teams. We've seen so many times in the past. Title team makes a run, and how many little tiny moments and players make a tiny difference to the point where if that just didn't bounce their way right there, they would have been out in the second round. Instead, they're now holding up the Larry O'Brien Trophy. Hopefully, that doesn't happen for the Celtics this year at all. But those are the type of moves that open up those possibilities. They are.
I'm more excited to see Davison than Jaden Springer right now because we've just been seeing nonstop consistent production out of him down in Maine or up in Maine. And I think that he's bound to get his call at some point, especially with the lack of perimeter support. And I think that we are going to see him more on the end of the bench because we already know what he's capable of in Maine. And obviously, we're not trying to win. Obviously, it's nice when Maine is doing good because that means that our potential and our development is doing great, but we already know what he's capable of
Right.
up there. Let's see a little bit more of him in TD Garden.
JD
I'd be
Davison, oh, please. I love JD Davison, but the small guard conversation,
I
there's
think
too many of them.
it's that's when it gets a little tricky. That's when it gets a little tricky, and I'm a little
JD
bit.
Davison and Jaden Springer, if they were the same, if they were somehow they were molded into the one player, perfect player. JD Davison has all the offense in the world. Defensively, kind of lacks.
Yeah.
Jaden Springer, all the defense in the world,
Yeah, you're
offensively
right.
lacks.
You're right.
It's like
Just
we can't
undersized.
get both.
Yeah, I do, unfortunately, and I do hate to say this because he's killing it right now, and I don't want to be so negative on a guy who hasn't really gotten his shot, but this is, I believe, JD's third season on a two-way deal with the Celtics. I'd be very shocked to see him back in a Celtics uniform next year, especially if it's not a standard deal. I don't know if we bring him back on a fourth two-way contract. But at the same time, who knows? He could definitely find himself on a young rebuilding team who needs a guard, whether that's a starting guard or a backup guard. He's killing it in Maine. I mean, he's putting up franchise leading numbers in assists and points, all time leaders up in Maine, even dating back to when they were the Maine Red Claws. So definitely want to give our flowers to JD down in Maine.